I really try to do this advocacy 24/7. It's not something that I want to always do, but it's in my blood now. And I miss my mother every day. A few weeks ago would have been her birthday, and we went to the funeral. And it was just not, it's not easy with the holidays coming up are tough. But the only thing that helps me grieve and move forward and never forget her is meeting amazing people like you who give me this opportunity. Because now you are aware of her, and maybe even if we reach one person, they know they're not alone, and then we've changed the world for the better. So thank you, and we send our love to you, your staff, and the entire audience. It's so thankful.
That's George Ackerman, who lost his mother to Parkinson's disease. This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. George Ackerman lost his mother, Sharon, in 2020 when she was 69 years old. George's mother and his father, who was a physician, were married for 23 years before divorcing in 1995. Not long after that, George, his mom, and his brothers moved to Florida to be near his mom's side of the family. George describes a happy, even idyllic life before they began to see symptoms of something wrong with his mom. At first, George writes in his book, A Son's Journey, that the initial troubling signs began in 1999, and they became increasingly worse, including less than a decade later, her arms becoming rigid. At the time, George says he was busy with law school, going to the police academy, and doing his doctoral studies in criminal justice. After a decade, though, the symptoms became even worse, with his mom's left arm hurting while she ate or performed everyday tasks, and George noticed that she was struggling to cut her own food. At the time, George says the family dismissed the symptoms as some of the natural parts of growing old, including perhaps arthritis. George noticed small things like trembling and slower movement, but became more apprehensive as he noticed she was struggling with things like tying her shoelaces. George's mom may have been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, at least according to a relative, as far back as 1984. When she would have been about 33 years old, George is not sure, but if she was, she never mentioned it to him. His mother struggled with medication and side effects, but George said, she lived a relatively normal and independent life until her final 3 years. Following his mom's death, George says, like it was for so many who lose a parent, it was overwhelming. George and his wife became caretakers for his mom in her last years. Later, George created togetherforsharon.com, a website that includes interviews he conducted with more than 1,000 people with Parkinson's, information to raise awareness about the disease, as well as resources for loved ones who are also suffering. He also hosts a podcast of the same name with his wife, and they produce episodes nearly every day of the month. George is driven by helping others, but also the race for a cure. Today, we're going to discuss what it's like to lose a loved one to a debilitating disease, his fight for awareness and a cure, and what lessons he has for those who are struggling in similar situations. It's not just a conversation about Parkinson's, but it's also one about grief and grieving, loss and making something good from losing, and letting go and grow. Hey, George, I just wanted to thank you for coming on. I really appreciated, by the way, hearing about your story, getting the chance to read your book. But before we even get started, I just wanted to, I know it's 2020, but I wanted to, as somebody who lost his mother last October, I just wanted to say that I was sorry for your loss, and I hope you're finding peace in your grief during this time.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, friendship, and the viewers. It means the world to shed light on this important topic. Unfortunately, we can't bring my mother back, but we can still fight in her memory for all those still battling Parkinson's today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really interesting things about losing my own mother, who struggled with an assortment of different ailments toward the end and diabetes during her entire life that sort of spurned into other issues, and had bouts with issues related to cognition. Is, for me, losing my mom was not like anything that I expected, but and I would have never guessed this a year ago, but there's been, for me, a tremendous amount of blessing and growth and appreciation, I think, that's come out of it. And to some extent, I'm not sure whether we would even be having this conversation today. And I say that because I don't, one of the things that I really believe is that when you've lost can really help you love other people more deeply, because we all commonly share loss in our lives. And I think I've grown to appreciate situations like yours and been able to love people more deeply because of my own. And, that's one of the blessings that comes from this. And, which is a decent segue to a lot of the work that you're doing and the blessings that are coming out of your mom's life.
Yeah, I always say, unfortunately, out of the darkness, there's been some positive and light on the overall experience for me as an advocate because I've been able to meet so many people like you who I never would have before. So,
Yeah, no, I feel very much the same. One of the things that I think sometimes when we're having these conversations and talking about issues, whether it's even loss or diseases like Parkinson's, we may not spend as much time going back and talking about the person's life. And I was just curious what life was like for you and your mom growing up before her symptoms, and what you know and before you even knew Parkinson's was on the horizon.
yeah, I was very busy because I work a lot in school, but she was always right by my side throughout everything. I don't think I would be the man I am today or have had the success I have if it wasn't for her sacrifices. She raised me and my brother alone, and she also gave up her education and her master's degree in education to help raise us. So I knew when it was time to be her caregiver, even though it wasn't expected, that I wouldn't even think of it, any other way.
Yeah, no, and that makes deep sense. So you had mentioned, and I think we're around the same sort of age or generation. Um, you had mentioned in your book that your parents had divorced in the 90s. That's right.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so from that point on, you guys went with your mom, as I remember.
No.
Um, but one of the things that you you mentioned in the book, you talked a lot about her personality, and one of the things that sort of just struck me was she seemed to be a very strong, independent person.
Yeah, she was, and she, loved life. She walked a lot. She loved spending time with the three grandchildren in the back, blowing bubbles, and always very positive. I think she had Parkinson's about 15 years, but didn't really, I believe, want to burden the family, which is sad in a way because I would have loved to have helped even more than I could have, but I wasn't aware. I heard of Parkinson. I didn't even know it was a disease. But as unfortunately it progressed, it was kind of too late for us in our journey. But what happens to one individual with Parkinson doesn't mean it'll happen to everyone. So that's the most complicated reason why there isn't a cure today.
One of the interesting things for me, about what you just said, you mentioned that your mom kept it from you guys for 15 years, and
No, I think like 7 years, and then it caught up, and
okay.
that's when I took over the last 4 years.
Okay. So, oh, she had it for 15 years. She had kept it for 7 years.
Right.
One of the things, my mom had probably been sick in different ways for like a decade, and one of the really interesting things she said to me about a month before she had died. She had gone into the hospital, and the doctors had called us in to talk about end of life care and whether we wanted to do extraordinary measures. And my mom had been unconscious, so she wasn't going to be a part of this conversation. But, true to form, she woke up right as we were beginning to have the conversation. And, it was neat to see that my family was in complete alignment about what to do. But I was really concerned because I was supposed to do some work traveling. And I was going out to Idaho and Washington State. And I said, Mom, you're really sick right now. Maybe I should cancel this trip um, and stay. And what she said was, no, Jason, live your life. And it really made me, thinking about that months later, recognize that to some extent during the time she was sick, she didn't want to burden us. She wanted, us to move forward with our families, our education, our career pursuits. And it was so important to her um, that we carry on. And I wonder whether you think for a lot of people who are suffering from diseases like Parkinson's, chronic illnesses, that part of what they don't want it to get in the way of their lives, but they also don't want it to get in the way of their children.
Yeah, the funny thing is, if she was with us today, she would, laugh and say, "Don't do any of my advocacy," because she doesn't want me to miss time with the family and things. So it's, but that's not how she raised me. So try to think of the lesson she taught me, and always keep fighting, even though it's again too late for us. It's not for so many others still battling today.
Yeah, and I bet she would have been on some levels thrilled,
Yeah.
thrilled that you and your wife have found a way for your family to advocate together through things like your podcast. And
Yeah, I never dreamt I'd have one. The only regret I do have, and none of it's about how we took care of her or tried to help because we didn't find the cure in time. But really, I wish we had this technology 20 years ago. I wish I had a show with my mother, and not about Parkinson, just about, life and together growing up, because those memories that I was able to locate for the book through family and friends is not the same if I had been able to, have like a YouTube with her and have had 20, 30 shows, and she would have loved it and we would have laughed a lot and would have had those, memories today. So that's the only kind of regret I do have.
yeah, no, I get that. I was blessed enough that I wrote a book a long time ago, and part of that was our family history. And
Right.
both of my mom and dad, I got a chance to do an oral history
Huh.
with them that's almost more valuable than anything that went into the book. Um, one of the things I was going to ask you a little bit about is the grieving process. Particularly when somebody has a serious illness, one of the things I think I've realized is that you begin mourning in your grieving process before the person's even gone. Like in those little things, in those little moments where you think about what life might be like without them, or that you recognize that finally you acknowledge they will eventually leave you. What was it like to watch your mom decline to be her caretaker and eventually lose her? And do you have any advice for people who are going through moments like that?
Yeah, the problem with Parkinson's is they don't consider it still some states as end of life. My mother had no other medical issues but Parkinson's, so I don't know if it was the complications of medicines or why it progressed so quickly. But the biggest problem is, again, we didn't plan that she would pass because we were told by over 15 experts, movement specialists for Parkinson's, that you don't die of Parkinson's, you die with it. So we continue to try to look for every venue and avenue we could to try and help her. But it's some reason, the fourth year before she passed, she went for a special trial and didn't. She came home that night, and 4 a.m. I was called to her home, and she had been moving her furniture out of her house in fear that there were Nazis inside. And we think it was the hallucinations and delusions came from the medicines, or because they drastically changed them, in one day. and it kind of left us. That's where we were baffled, alone, and that's when my journey started with her. And it was just that was the worst. So it's hard to really say what was happening because even to this day we don't understand, and neither do the doctors, why it progressed. Because there are people who live, older lives with Parkinson, but it didn't wasn't the case. And she was only 69, and to me that's way too young. Today, my weird world, I feel that should be alive till 85 or more, and she didn't get that opportunity.
It's an interesting thing too, for that moment where, you walk in and I think it's hard enough dealing with anyone you care about going through something like a hallucination or a delusion,
Yes,
because it pops up in even young people with mental health issues and alcoholics and all sorts of other things. What was that moment like where you you realized something was terribly wrong with the way that your mom was thinking, which we know is a common thing that can happen in some of these diseases. And to your point, it's not always because of the disease itself. It's very often because of the treatments for it.
right. Yeah, I mean, there's no exact science, unfortunately, still with Parkinson's. I believe it's environment, and that's how she got it. She had a beautiful home, but 20 years had, termites and normal kind of things, and also had mold in the house. So we tried to keep it up. But back then, they sprayed things that are horrific, and that's what I think how she got it. But they don't think it's genetic. But again, every day was kind of something new. It was like we're trying to tackle one thing, but we couldn't because there was so many other things. So we took her to every person and option and treatment that could even be dreamed of, and it just didn't work out. But I don't think again even today I could have brought her anywhere else or done anything different.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just curious, like what did it feel like in that moment where you realized something was terribly wrong?
Yeah, I felt fear, anxiety, sad. Like the worst, I think, was when two things. Number one is when you have hope that you're going to come through it with her, but I couldn't. We kept failing in a way, even though it wasn't our. We tried. And then the other thing is every time she asked me, what's going to happen and is she going to be there for her grandchildren's wedding, I couldn't really answer. I never lied, but I always tell the truth. I just said I don't know. Those are the most heartbreaking moments, I guess, because you can't, give an answer. I'm an attorney and a police officer, and I have a PhD in criminal justice. So I always, make lists throughout my life and try to accomplish them and always seem to. But that's the one that haunts me today that we, couldn't accomplish the main thing, which was the cure.
Yeah. And for your mom in that moment, she's like, it sounds like she was fearful of what she was going to lose.
Yeah, she was panicked also a lot.
Yeah.
But the worst feeling, I think, is not even the disease, it's the other things around it. And it's almost like we felt that we had secondary Parkinson's because we, were sitting there holding her hand, going through all this together, and again, couldn't do anything to stop the progression.
Yeah. What do you mean by that, secondary Parkinson's?
Yeah, I mean, as a PhD or a writer, and a lot of my work is before I was an advocate with Parkinson's to help my mother. I actually advocated for family members of homicide victims, specifically African American women in South Florida, because they oftentimes are forgotten. So there's something called secondary victim, where you lose a loved one due to a crime, but you become a victim too because it's, they're not treated like they should throughout the system and they're often forgotten. So I kind of correlate that to the Parkinson's community because I felt that I didn't have the symptoms, but sitting there holding my mother's hand and looking at the symptoms 24/7 definitely made me feel like I had Parkinson's, even though I didn't have the physical complications. I did have the mental. So there's a lot of mental health issues that are not discussed enough with caring for someone with Parkinson.
Yeah, because essentially, you are, it may not be the same, but you are there
Yeah.
suffering with them. Like two spots where I hear this often is because I often have conversations with people whose loved ones are missing, and missing persons cases are notoriously difficult, as you know, as a police officer. And it's very difficult to get the families the information they need. And there's so many rumors, and there all sorts of things that can go wrong in those kinds of the long-term missing cases, and they really do, particularly if they become in the public eye, they or are ignored, they do become secondary victims. But another place where I've seen that is in the mental health community, where loved ones are trying to help the person that they love who has a mental illness, and they feel powerless, stressed. It's enormously difficult. Is that kind of the idea that you're getting at? What is it like? Because I know Parkinson's is so different for so many people, but in your work, or in your experience, are there certain themes in terms of the emotional mental health struggles that loved ones go through?
Yeah, the hard thing with Parkinson's is that some believe the medical profession that there's 5 stages. So the first three are more like movement symptoms like tremors, rigidity, also posture, balance, difficulty walking, changes in facial expressions. And the first 3 stages you can still live independently. The problem is when you get to the fourth and fifth, which is the most tragic, you lose the independence, even have trouble many times standing, bathing, dressing, sleeping, or walking. Then the stage 5 is the delusions and hallucinations, loss of smell, constipation, weight loss, sleep disturbance, and vision, and poor reasoning. So we went through all those with my mother, and the tragic part again is there's no like timetable, there's no data or research saying when you'll get it, who will get it, and all these things. So it's a very very difficult thing to plan for, even if I had it over again.
In sort of like a perfect world, there are doctors and clinics that specialize um, in the disorder or the disease. Um, is there are there resources or things that people can tap into, or do medical professionals talk, or is that something they could do more of, talking a little bit to the loved ones about the things that they're going to face?
And the problem with a lot of doctors is I don't blame them for the disease, but they're not also prepared. Many of them give like a brochure, tell them you're going to do a medication, but then kind of you're out the door. So I don't know how much of the, they're busy too, obviously researching and things. So it's not much support. That's why you have to find, that's why I started resources like, togetherforsharon.com, where I felt alone as a caregiver and I wasn't sure who to turn to or what to do. So I decided to take all the resources around the world and put them in one area completely free. I don't believe in charges and things. That's not why I do this. I don't accept money. We just do it to help. I don't want anyone to ever feel alone. That's the most important thing to me. Like, I felt alone as a caregiver. My mother felt alone as someone battling the disease.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you what you would have wanted to know as a loved one now, having gone through the experience. Like what kinds of things would have been helpful for you to have known?
Think the main thing is probably that you're not alone and that there are individuals out there. I just realized a week ago too. I don't know why I was thinking about it, but my mother never even met somebody who had Parkinson's, which is sad because I think that that could have kind of not helped her.
I remember one time when I was working at a mental health clinic. Um, and one of the things that I was talking to a psychiatrist, so his whole job is prescribing medications. And he said to me that with clients with bipolar, if he had a choice of, if you only gave him one choice, excuse me, two choices between family support, peer support, and medication, he said he'd choose family support and peer support. And I asked him why. I said, you're a medical doctor. Why would you say that? And he said, the medications obviously work and they're obviously effective. But if you don't have family support, if you don't have peer support, it harms you so much mentally that the cost is too great. So he always, looked for ways to get loved ones and his patients involved in peer support groups. Do those exist for families and for people who have Parkinson's?
We couldn't find it at the time. So now I actually started my own. Just it's more for people though like me who lost a loved one due to Parkinson's, and I just started it recently. We have a good turnout, but there's not a lot of ways to reach people who lost a loved one. So I'm writing a book on it, but my first book, A Son's Journey, was really dedicated in my mother's memory, but for all those still fighting today. But I find, even as an advocate, a lot of times they don't want my story to be heard because they don't want to hear the sadder sides. A lot of these organizations, which, and I don't blame them, but of the realities of Parkinson's, like I know millions of people, but never really get asked to speak, which is sad, and I don't really want to because I don't have the time. But it's something that I find as a advocate for someone who lost a loved one that there's not much out there, and even if there is, they don't discuss it, which is really kind of fascinating in a way, but also sad. I don't know.
Well, because I think people like to focus on hope. They like to focus on the positive things. But I think, I was having a conversation with a friend recently about how hollow compliments are when they're not based in reality. And I think there's some truth to hope also that is that way. If you're unwilling to deal with the sadness and the struggles, then the hope that you promote is almost meaningless. And I think that's one of the things I found really powerful about your book was its honesty about the difficulty. But one of the things I thought about just thinking about when you wrote it, must have been writing it and published it, it was so close to your loss of your mother. And I was curious, why did you embark on writing the story? Was it an act of sort of therapy and advocacy?
Yeah, it helps me cope, but I didn't really want to. I didn't have a plan. I didn't want to write a book. I did keep a journal the last 4 years, and it was like the last year was the toughest. It's a whole chapter, but it's actually I kept a journal as a caregiver of what my mother and I went through the last year, from time, date, stamp, and everything, just to give people a picture of what it's like as a caregiver or someone in the final year, but we never really again knew it was going to be the final year, and so that's why I decided finally to put it out. And really, again, I feel like she lost 15 years alive and 15 years after she passed due to the disease, and I didn't want her to be forgotten due to Parkinson's. And then after 2 years, I was kind of saddened and shocked to find out that there weren't just uh, 1 million people in the US, but 10 million around the world. And that kind of broke my heart a second time. And that's when I decided to embark on a new journey, which I kind of finished. I've interviewed 1,000 people around the world, from France, England, Spain, Italy, Iceland, you name it. Parkinson doesn't really discriminate, which is also sad. But so I put those, recently released a second book called Voices of Resilience, and it's actually journeys of other people going through the Parkinson's, whether diagnosed caregivers or advocates, and how important it is not just to share my journey and my mother, but we really all need to be a family in the fight for a cure. And I spend a lot on these books. I don't make a penny because I donate everything, but as you know, it's extremely expensive. Also, there's not enough awareness. So a lot of people don't want to cover Parkinson's disease, which is really part of the problem with awareness. Just the last few months, the national plan to end Parkinson's disease was signed into law. It's the first federal law in history for Parkinson's, which was huge. Then you saw a lot of discussion with President Biden, whether he had Parkinson's or not. Then after that, Ryan Reynolds kind of came out and discussed delusion to hallucination about his father with Parkinson's who passed. And then just a month ago, Brett Favre also discussed how he has it. And he actually gave me a message, which is on our website, from him and me to the Parkinson's community. So sadly, it's been growing. I don't know if my work is getting helpful or it's just that the diseases are now spreading more. But I've had the honor to meet, Michael J. Fox. I had Jack Osborne, because Ozzy Osbourne has Parkinson's, gave me a message, and some other incredible people. And I'm just trying to reach as many people as we can. I don't get, again, It's all voluntary. Not easy to do. It's probably spending $70,000 in 4 years and didn't expect a penny back. But I just still feel in my heart that I can't rest till we find a cure.
I remember, Michael J. Fox in the 80s. I was too young for sort of like Midnight Madness and Class of 1984, even though I've seen them before. I really sort of like came into him, I think, during his you know, NBC career and his you know, uh Back to the Future and all the other things that he worked on, like Family Ties. And one of the things about Michael J. Fox, and you really see it in Family Ties, he is an energetic person, full of life, engaging, quick, all these sort of like amazing things that stand out. And I'll never forget, like, the moment where his career, after he was on the show Spin City on ABC, you know, began to end, and he retired and announced his diagnosis with Parkinson's. And then watching him, you know, progress over time, and certainly, he has made the most of it, very clearly made the most of it. I remember seeing him playing guitar with Coldplay at a festival this year, at least the video of it. And but watching things like the movement issues or the rigidity just sap the life out of one of the most alive people
Mm.
I've seen. you know it was just very, I think, painful, to watch. And what was that like for you? Because I think for me, I don't even know if you remember that during the time, but one of the things that was really striking for me is, I think by the time he was diagnosed, I really hadn't even heard of Parkinson's disease. And you brought up Brett Favre being open about it, Ozzy Osbourne being open about it. But it was just very, very striking to me that this disease that affected so many people I had never heard of until this voice came out. Did you know anything about it before your mom?
Mm. No, I didn't really ever hear of it, and that's the problem. I wish I had, but unless things, unfortunately, in any disease field, any life, even politics, unless sometimes it affects you and your family, you don't really have the time or openness sometimes to learn about it. So, I didn't know much. I did watch all his movies. I never really watched the TV shows, but now there are people. He's my hero because he did kind of decide to be public, where he didn't go the private way, which is no problem if he did. But to be able to start a foundation and reach people and do what he's doing is incredible. He's still doing it today. He was in Orlando a week or two ago. Wanted to go, but my own health hasn't been great, so I missed it. But he is amazing. I mean, there's other people I was actually very close to doing, because we have a show now. I've had over 100 episodes, which I don't know how. I interview people with Parkinson's, and I actually interviewed James Brown's daughter last week. Some big NFL football players, not Brett Favre, was coming on the show, and possibly Brian Grant's son, who's a famous NBA basketball player who has
Let's see.
Parkinson. But uh, so it's not always easy, though, to get these individuals. I thought when we started together for Sharon.com, we'd have like 4 people, and I would have been fine with that. But we've had, there's a little counter on this page that no one can see unless you go looking for it. It's there. That we've had over 40,000 people visit the site. So it's definitely something that is growing. But again, I'm scared that it's growing because it's progressing, not because of just, what I'm doing.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I am curious about, I remember back in 2020, and so this is more than almost 10 years into his very serious advocacy, even though he had opened up about it before then. I remember reading this interview where Michael J. Fox said something along the lines of, like, he was asked, you know, how do you think you got Parkinson's disease? And he responded by saying that he could think of 1,000 possible scenarios. And he mentions like going fishing near in the river near paper mills and eating the salmon that he caught, living on a lot of farms, smoking a lot of pot in high school at a time where the government was poisoning the crops. But he said it can make you crazy trying to figure out how you got Parkinson's. Have we made any progress in figuring out what causes it?
Yeah, they did find a biomarker last year, but it's very evasive. So it's something I've had 4 back surgeries I wouldn't do, but there's a needle in the spine that you can get that can actually determine if you have it, or and it's important for early diagnosis and treatment and slowing the progression. So it's very, very, very important. But again, it's pretty evasive. So, and then there's still not a cure, but we've learned a lot more today, such as exercise now can really slow the progression that we weren't as aware of back then. So there's a lot of different areas that are progressing, and because of the Michael J. Fox Foundation, they've made some huge strides. I have a meeting with them in a few days and try to work with them the best I can. It's really an honor to be able to be a part of anything with them, and also they actually have my books on their website, which I never thought my mother would be on Michael J. Fox's website, whether it's for sad, reasons. It's still incredible, opportunity for awareness.
One of the things that Fox talked about, Michael J. Fox, as well as Brett Favre, you know, even before, because I remember Brett Favre, who was diagnosed, I think, in January, he mentioned that he was having trouble with his arm, having a hard time holding a screwdriver. But they both talk about this period, both before and after the diagnosis, of sort of like feeling deep depression. I know Michael J. Fox talks about drinking heavily afterwards. Are mental health issues for those who are in early diagnosis something that you should be concerned about? And I say that because you mentioned something like exercise can slow the progression, but also when people are spiraling into sort of depression, it's really hard to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is an issue that's not discussed enough. I don't know. Like, I don't think we did go to a psychiatrist for my mother because of the delusions and hallucination, but she didn't like that at all. And she didn't want to go there because she didn't want to think that, mentally she was kind of deteriorating. So it wasn't the best experience. So also they just, at least the one I went to just wants more medicines and the medicine. And when my mother passed, I had to throw out 5 huge contractor bags of medicines that she was taking. So I'm not a big medicine believer. I don't think it helps a lot, and sometimes it can actually affect mental issues 10 times worse.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I certainly experienced that with my mother. I remember during COVID, her doctor got so frustrated by her mental state. They had diagnosed her with dementia. Turned out she didn't actually have dementia, and it was being caused by the medications. And it wasn't until, so she was seeing all these different specialists, cardiologists,
Yeah.
uh, endocrinologist for the diabetes, and there was a neurologist involved. And there were all these different specialists. There were more than that. And, one of the things that's been happening in healthcare is consolidation. These large companies are buying all these practices. Well, the same large company bought all their practices. And so her family physician finally demanded that all the doctors get together. And they were sitting in the room with a geriatric specialist, and the geriatric specialist was listening to the medications that she was on. And the geriatric specialist was like, well, obviously, she's showing these signs of dementia. It's the conflicts between the medications that you're taking. And I wonder whether how important sort of like case management and coordination of care is to people with Parkinson's in terms of living the best quality of life.
Yeah, it's very hard. I mean, we even hired a private case manager to help us, but it doesn't. But she wasn't. It didn't work out. But it's very hard because you have to juggle going to doctors, researching new issues and research, trying to make sure she's safe, then dealing with the medical. It was just like one. It felt like hammer hitting me as a nail on the head 100 times a day, and just felt hopeless a lot of the time because everything we tried didn't work. So it was not an easy overall situation.
You had mentioned earlier that you had done 1,000 interviews with people all over the world. I'm just curious, what kinds of themes did you hear from them?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different for each person, but it's so many, there's things like DBS surgery, which only helps with the external tremors. But most people who had it, uh, they didn't, they loved it and wish they did it earlier. One individual didn't like it, didn't
And
help for,
that's deep brain stimulation, which is
yeah,
that surgical therapy
right,
where it's used in Parkinson's. It's used in, I think, a couple other disorders like mental health related things,
yeah,
but they stimulate parts of your brain, right,
yeah.
to help deal with some of the motor symptoms, some of the sleep related symptoms. And I think, as I recall, you have implanted electrodes and electrical stimulation that really treats the movement aspect of it. Um, and you were saying that some did like it, some got benefit from it, some didn't. Is it?
See, 99% said they wish they had done it earlier, so they loved it. But I did have one person who had a horrible experience. So again, the problem is different, for everybody.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the days when that was only available at the Cleveland Clinic and the
Yeah.
Mayo Clinic, and it's become such a, I think, such a broader thing. Were there other themes that you heard from people that
Not
stuck out
really. I
to
mean,
you?
like dieting is important, but my mother did that. And then walking or any exercise. They have yoga. They have Tai Chi, they have dancing for part. They have so many things today, but even just learn about pickleball for Parkinson. So there are so many things, but it's not always, easy to do those depending on the stage of the disease or the age of the person. So it's not an easy answer, unfortunately.
Do we know what it is about those activities that help?
Think dopamine, a lot of the things that are created. I'm not a medical doctor, but in the brain, and the brain can slow down the progression when you're exercising because it's kind of helping, yes, the neurons and a lot of more medical. You might need a medical doctor for that. I do know a lot, but I don't like, I only comment usually on my mother's journey because everyone's so different. But that's what I think it is. It's just something to do with the brain and how, exercise is very healthy, eating diet is healthy. Anything you could be, even if you're the caregiver, you should be doing the exercise. So it's not really just for people with Parkinson, but that has shown scientifically to slow the progression. Dancing is also important. Just so many now, and you can do it all home. Music therapy. There's just so many types. It just wasn't available back then. COVID was terrible, but also helped a lot of people. People with Parkinson sometimes, like my mother, didn't want to leave the house because they felt terrible and didn't look right. My mother deteriorated the last year so bad that she was sadly ashamed. Like she didn't really want to see her own grandkids at some point because of how she looked and felt. My wife was the biggest support and my kids for me because my mother, female, my wife's female, and there were certain things I'm not aware of. And my mother was, very sad. But my wife was incredible and would bring in like people to do her hair and her nails and pedicure. It was really nice little things that made her smile for those tougher moments. But it was the last year was the toughest. We just bought her a new home, brand new, a dream. Thought she'd sit there with the kids for 10 years and enjoy the lake and everything. And first second she walked in, which I still have the picture, we were all so happy. But from that moment on, she really never enjoyed, life. Didn't get to have any enjoyment of any of this stuff. So
Yeah, you had mentioned that there's no cure for Parkinson's, and I know that recently, even in the last few months, there's been some. We just at this point have treatment, but there's been some promising research about treatment that could potentially slow or reverse the progression of the disease. And we've heard this with lots of diseases over time where unfortunately it didn't pan out. And then you look at sort of the cousins to Parkinson's disease where we've heard similar potential advances, but never really played out like Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease or, multiple sclerosis. You mentioned this idea of fighting for the cure. Do you think that there's hope for a cure on the horizon?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be. I just don't know when. Seems like they're always making good ground, but the awareness needs to be better. We need everyone. That's why I love your show, and you actually have a great research, and I appreciate all the time you put in with the book and things. So, gone on like hundreds of shows, and many don't know anything, which is also nice. But I try to reach people who aren't aware, who don't have Parkinson's, and who are not caregivers, because I feel it's the only way if we get everyone involved that we'll be closer. But without, donations, which we don't accept, but we do support Michael J. Fox and the American Parkinson Disease Association. If you go to togetherforsharon.com, you'll see donations, but all the links are made in my mother's memory, which was really nice. And if you donate, it doesn't go to us. We don't accept it goes to them. And they have the, researchers, the medical doctors to advance towards a cure. So I don't know if it'll be I mean, I wish it was tomorrow so I can stop this all, but until they, find one, I won't stop.
Yeah, one of the things that people have talked about, and I know that Dr. Mark Fraser, who's the chief scientific officer at the Michael J. Fox Foundation, has talked about like one of the real opportunities for breakthrough here, maybe looking at things a little bit differently because there's been a surgence and hope for this idea of personalized medicine where you're able to look at somebody's genetic markers and you're able to sort of adjust your life or use medical interventions before a disease develops, to create it. And one of the things that I know that they've talked about is really utilizing things like personalized medicine or even trying to find a vaccine that could be administered to people who have the markers. Do you think that's a promising avenue?
Yeah, they have with the spine, the thing we mentioned earlier, they are trying to move that into minor blood tests like they can have in every doctor's office to see if you have Parkinson's, which would be beautiful. So that's the newest thing I know they've been working on. But then again, not to be negative, I remember towards the end of my mother's life, they were talking about having a pill and in 3 days you can cure it. And then it was actually, I thought it was a Michael J. Fox Foundation or article somewhere, but as you can see, 5, 6 years later, it never came. So, they're trying, the one thing, if you never know where the money goes, you donate. We've raised $40,000 to these organizations. I hope they're, using it for good reasons, but you just have to hope that they are. And, just keep hope is if we don't and we'll stop and we don't do anything, we'll never find a cure. So I do see again advances. It's too late for us, but not for many out there who are battling today and in the future. I mean, I could still get Parkinson's. We don't again know exactly why someone gets it. So if it if I do, then I wish there was a cure by then. So
Yeah, and I know that some of those trials are only in I think there's one at Mayo Clinic and it's a partnership with the University of Texas. They're only in the sort of safety stage and they'll progress into the treatment space, into the actually treating providing therapy for the disorder at some point. But at this moment where we don't have a cure to diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or Huntington's disease, what I wanted to sort of like wrap with what are your hopes and dreams for people who are struggling with diseases like Parkinson's and for their loved ones?
I have a little message I always say: we love you, we support you, we care a lot about you, and you're never alone. I will advocate for you, and together I feel our voices are so much stronger. I always say I'm just getting started because there's a lot still to do. Don't think there's enough time in the day for what I have planned. I have a major book coming out next year on the world of policing and Parkinson's disease, which is going to change the world. I hope for how police are aware and also treat people when they have interactions with Parkinson's. So that's going. I'm hoping to go to Congress maybe and have every academy in the United States add Parkinson's disease into all the training. So we'll see. The problem I have though is just getting the word out. I can't possibly afford to send my book to every single police academy in the country. So that's my only fear is, again, it's back to we need to get we might have books and things, but if they're not out there, I've sent a lot of them free around the country, but media doesn't seem to want to do much to help. And even the people from the National Plan to End Parkinson's were a few really, big congressmen and women. Thankfully, my U.S. Senator Rick Scott came on my show, and one amazing representative, Paul Tonko in New York, came on the show. All the stuff I do is really just for free for awareness, and it was sad to find out, like 4 or 5 other congressmen wouldn't even talk, which is kind of again the problem. I'll be putting that in a book in the future, and it's gonna be more controversial, but I'm listing people's names and gonna have more. I want people to be aware. It's not easy to be an advocate. There's been many times I almost gave up because 99.9% are beautiful. You always have the 1% that some reason, even though we're all in this as a family, there's nothing else more than a cure we want. I don't accept money, so I'll never understand those few people, but we continue to fight and we never give up.
Well, I wonder, whether, with politicians and others who can bring funding or raise awareness, on one hand, 1 million people with Parkinson's in the United States is a huge number. And then you think about all of their family members, and then you multiply it by that number of people who are affected. But on another hand, in a country of 350
I,
million, it may not touch enough people. I wonder whether there's an avenue for advocates supporting people with all those neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and Huntington's and Alzheimer's to sort of align together to do some of these things like advocate or educate the police or other things like that. Have there been any efforts in that direction?
Not with police because I've done a lot of research. They have like one organization that has like a band that you wear, but that's not enough time to call. And if the police don't know what that is, so there's not really much. I can't believe there's not a book in the world that I've seen from a son who lost their mother due to Parkinson's. That's again the reason I wrote it. I've never seen a book where they're covering other people's journeys. That's why I wrote it. I have one also working on about Parkinson's in the legal field. Have another one, a kid's book for because I still don't know how to explain to my children today what happened to their grandmother. So there's things out there that I don't see. That's why I write. I'm actually working on a big one, I hope, with a group of people on sports and lowering the progression of Parkinson's. And that one will be in a few years. So I don't really want to write anymore, but there's just things that I see a problem with. I have a big one in 2 years coming. I won't say the name, but it's going to focus around people like me who lost a loved one due to Parkinson's. And I feel I'm often forgotten by the bigger organizations, which is sad. And that one is more for, I think if we got in touch with the billions, not millions, but I think billions of people who lost loved ones due to Parkinson, brought them back into the conversation, we would have already had a cure, but it's not happening. It's not something they even want. If you plan ahead, you don't have to worry about passing. But so many important topics like end of life, wills, so many aspects that will cause you less stress. My mother was like heaven. She didn't know she was gonna pass due to it, but she let me be her power of attorney, was able to take care of her, do anything I needed and she needed. Made it a little teeny bit more comforting. When she passed, everything was done. Everything was already kind of split up. No fights, no problems. All these things are chaos to families if you don't plan. And unfortunately, I feel that most of the families, too, after they lose a loved one, they move on because they're not really sure what else they would be helpful for. But there's so much they could do. And I'll see some of them people at walks, which is nice, but it's just one day a year. It's not enough. So there's just a lot more discussion and awareness that needs to be done, and I can only do my part. We're not a foundation on purpose because I didn't want to be like that. I just wanted to do this for the website and help others. But I'm only one son and one person who had lost his best friend and mother due to Parkinson's, and unless we have people like you and others out there advocating, joining together, it's going to be much harder. So I'm grateful for you, your audience, and all those who do want to reach out to me and work together. That's the only way we're going to get this accomplished.
Perhaps I'm Pollyanna and a little too optimistic, but I do believe that one person can change the world. I wanted to give you a chance to, if you have any closing thoughts or message that you want to send to people, what the most meaningful thing that they could walk away with from this conversation with you.
My main goal again is that no one is ever alone. But if you don't, reach out, then it's tougher to, find people. And I share journeys. That's what keeps me going today. I mean, gentlemen, four of them rode around the United States and the world, I think, and they raised $40 million for awareness for Parkinson. They're coming on my show. So you can go to the website. It's free. You can see 1,000 interviews free. You can see the podcast for free. We just did a funny one for Halloween. I dressed up like Hulk Hogan and gave a whole speech about, how Hulkamania is going to get you Parkinson's disease. So, we got to make a little light of it and a little laughter. And my dream is just to keep people smiling, and anything I can do to. Unfortunately, I have my own health issues, which is for a different show. I'm getting actually a back stimulator put in, which I didn't want after 4 failed back surgeries. So it's very hard between work, family, my own medical issues, but I really try to do this advocacy 24/7. It's not something that I want to always do, but it's in my blood now. And I miss my mother every day. A few weeks ago would have been her birthday, and we went to the funeral. And it was just not, it's not easy. We have the holidays coming up are tough, but the only thing that helps me grieve and move forward and never forget her is meeting amazing people like you. Give me this opportunity because now you are aware of her, and maybe even if we reach one person, they know they're not alone, and then we've changed the world for the better. So thank you, and we send our love to you, your staff, and the entire audience. It's so thankful.
Thanks, George. I really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us for this conversation with George. If you'd like to join us for more discussions with me and other listeners, we can be found on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. We always have great conversations on there, and you're all more than welcome to join us. For deeper conversations with our guests and live conversations with other listeners, for $3 a month, you can join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. Our Patreon members are absolutely key to keeping the podcast going, and it's a fun place to be, especially for the live discussions and the interesting things that we do there. This is Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again next week.